It was sudden. We got a call from a nearby city's police station. Our uncle, who was taking care of me and my sister, while our parents were away, answered the phone. We were confused as to why our uncle was crying until we learned the news. Our parents were found dead over 11 miles away from where they started hiking over 3 days ago. I was horrified. I felt as if my world has just splintered into nothing, and my sister just fell to the floor while I just sat there, blank face and warm tears running down my cheeks. The sheriff was obligated to ask us where we wanted the funeral and other questions. Thankfully, my uncle pulled himself together and scheduled his own brother and sister-in-law's funeral by himself. The weeks flew by as the weekend was over, and I was left in a well of grief, still processing all that had recently happened. Eventually, we got another call, telling us that another piece of evidence had been found. We initially dismissed it until they told us that it belonged to our parents. As they told us, the more intrigued we were, until my uncle decided to drive us all down there. After all of us at least wanted to see their faces one more time, since mysteriously, the funeral was closed casket. Once we got there, we waited in the waiting room until a man guided us in. They said they had not yet reviewed the footage, and that when they found it, it was covered in blood and still recording, even though it was clearly damaged. Finally, we got to a room where they were ready to play the footage, and all of us took a seat before the man who let us in started the video. At first, it was just my parents walking. We fast-forwarded. More walking, some fishing, picking up sticks, and skipping rocks. I was simply happy to see my parents again, even if it was just a recording. We went to the next video. My parents were just walking, but looked noticeably tired and anxious. Eventually, while they were resting, my mother broke the silence. "Did you hear any of that last night?" My father responded, "Yeah, it sounded so odd, like it was directly in my ear, but also near a mile away." She gave him an agreeing nod. Eventually, they kept walking, not breaking the silence, until they camped. "Do you think it will happen again?" my mother asked. My father responded, "It had to have been just some animal. No creature would follow us that far, just to make some noises and not do anything to us." "But what if it—" My mother was cut off. "Just trust me. We'll leave tomorrow and forget any of this happened." My father tried to reassure her. It worked, and they went to bed. On the third day, though, something was off. My mother no longer had her bright energy accompanying her, and my father seemed to be suffering from sleep deprivation. It felt as though my parents were just husks of their former selves. And more ominous than that, there was a strange, faint background noise constantly playing for the first 3 hours. Then it just stopped. My parents looked around and seemed to sigh and become way more relaxed. Then they stopped for a food break at a small creek. It seemed good until that noise started back up. And louder than before, this caused notable dread in my parents, as the fear in their eyes was visible. They both ran away, leaving all their food behind, as the noise kept getting louder. Eventually, my mother tripped, and her bone-chilling screams could be heard in the background as the noise seemed to stop with her. After 2 hours of non-stop running, my father ended up at our house backyard. I heard him sobbing uncontrollably. He was a mess just by the audio. He started to get it together and approach our house until the light around him seemed to wash away, like fresh paint in reaction to water. We sat there watching this overwhelming silence and darkness until it was broken by a faint sound. Then it got louder and louder, until it felt like my eardrums were about to pop. My father appeared back in the woods, but he was not alone. As he turned, a part of the screen seemed to warp and glitch out. My father looked at it and started screaming as the thing approached him in the blink of an eye. My father seemed to be screaming as something was inserted into his mouth. Then it stopped when the snapping of his bones was heard. The GoPro fell onto the ground, and it filmed my father floating over the glitching part of the screen. Then both of them just seemed to phase out of focus and into nothingness. I was in shock by what I saw, and so was everyone else in the room with me. My sister was pale, and my uncle looked completely petrified. Finally, the police escorted us out. The drive home was silent, and we all seemed to not dare to speak a word, because in the silence, we all heard it. The faint sound of the thing that killed my parents, slowly approaching. I got my current job as a cashier at a grocery store for one of the nation's largest grocery store chains, sometime in April of 2018. I was 20 years old, and it was the first job I'd ever had working in fast food. It quickly became my favorite job I'd ever had. Those feelings didn't last much longer than a month. So the store closes at 11, and a typical shift for me at the time was 3:30 in the afternoon until midnight. The hour between closing time and the time I punch out is supposed to be spent cleaning registers and emptying trash cans. But almost every night, I have to spend the first 5 or 10 minutes checking out the last remaining customers who ignored the store closing announcements and are only just now making it up to the checkout. On this particular night, sometime in late May of 2018, I was just about to close down when an older man walked up to my lane. I glanced at the time quickly and saw that it was 11:13. Asshole, I remember thinking to myself. If you're not going to bother to get in line until 13 minutes after we close, you should honestly just go home. Of course, I'd perfected my customer service voice working in fast food, so I put on my widest, fakest smile and gave him a cheerful, "Hi, do you happen to have your rewards card on you tonight by any chance?" Instead, the man shook his head. His face was exceptionally worn, and his eyes were incredibly baggy, making him look like he should have gone to sleep hours ago. "Nope, just this, thanks," he said quietly, almost muttering, as he placed something onto the conveyor belt. At first I couldn't tell what it was. Something from the meat department, maybe, until it began to cry. I physically recoiled as I realized what it was. It was a baby, a naked, human, newborn baby. And when I say newborn, I mean it looked as if it was only minutes or hours old. It hadn't even been cleaned up yet, and it was wearing what looked like a hospital band around its ankle that had a barcode on it. Unsure of what to do, I looked up to my manager for help, but he just gave me a wide-eyed, desperate look and shook his head. I looked back at the man. "Well?" he asked in that same quiet, mumbling tone. "Aren't you going to scan it?" I froze up for a second, but then, confused and scared, and not knowing what else to do, I scanned the barcode on the infant's ankle. I don't know what I was expecting, but it did ring up. Spawn, $10.89 for this newborn child. I stared at my screen in disbelief, trying not to think about the fact that in my state, the only items that don't have sales tax are food items. A second later, I was interrupted by the irritating beep, beep, beep. that the card machine makes once the customer's payment has gone through. Another second later, I heard the whir of the receipt machine. The man grabbed the child in his arms, and then he stood there just looking at me. It took me a second to realize he was waiting for his receipt. I gave it to him, and he nodded. "Thank you," he mumbled, taking the receipt from me and turning around to exit. Still in a state of shock, I waited for the man to be gone, and then immediately made my way over to my manager to get an explanation. I opened my mouth to start asking questions, but before I could even get a word out, he interrupted me. "Don't." He began desperately shaking his head, and I noticed the wide-eyed look of fear on his face. "Just don't. Don't ask about it." I'm not sure why. Maybe it was how terrified my manager looked, or maybe it was just how surreal and terrifying the entire situation was, or maybe it was just because I knew that nobody would believe me. But for whatever reason, I listened. I did try to go to the police afterwards, exactly once. The 911 operator who took my call accused me of making a prank call, and even after I persisted and got the police to actually come out to the store, they found no evidence to support my claims. I was told that I could be arrested if I continued to make phone calls, and nothing ever came of it. I tried to quit and was told by my manager that it was a really bad idea and that I would be putting myself and my loved ones in very serious danger if I did. He told me that he'd been harmed badly by somebody years ago for trying to quit. He wouldn't go into any more detail than that, and told me that I really shouldn't ask questions about it at all. Somehow, he seemed to believe that whoever it was who'd hurt him would know if I asked about it. And so that's how that became my life. Every 2 or 3 weeks, at seemingly random intervals, the same man comes in to purchase another infant. He always gets in line 12 or 13 minutes after the store closes. And he always does it when there's nobody else in the store. Nobody else interacts with him. And I've learned by now to just stay quiet and check him out. The less I say, the faster I move, the sooner he's away from me. It's been more than 2 years, and I still go home every time it happens and lay in bed all night shaking, never able to sleep. I've never told a single person, but I just got home from work, and it happened again. So I'm not going to be able to sleep anyway. And since I've run out of things to do during my sleepless nights, I figured it might help to type it out, and that I can probably get away with it as long as I'm vague enough about where I live and where I work. I just got a job offer at a different grocery store recently, and I accepted. So hopefully I won't be working here much longer. I do have to call them and make sure they aren't going to make me work the closing shift, though. I'll never work another closing shift again. My wife and I have always lived a quiet life in the country with our son Wesley. Our 9-acre property is surrounded to the north and the east by a forest, where Wesley would often go play with his friends or by himself. For his 8th birthday, I had gone into the forest with Wesley to help him make his own tree fort where he could stash his comic books, Game Boy, toys, and treasures that he would find while exploring the woods behind our house. He amassed quite the collection of interesting rocks and bugs, which he stored in mason jars in his forest base, and he spent most of his free time just a few hundred yards away from our house. It was a peaceful life that we had for ourselves. I would take our car into work on the weekdays and bring my wife to town right after Wesley's bus arrived to take him to school. Each day was the same routine, and we spent the weekends together at the house. In short, we were all very happy. This week is the 6th anniversary of my son, Wesley's disappearance. To this day, we don't know what happened to him on that brisk autumn evening, but from the moment our 20-year-old son left the house, we had a sneaking suspicion he was never coming back. On Friday, August 23rd, 2013, our daily morning ritual happened as it always had. I would wake up, eat breakfast with Kim and Wesley, and we would wait together until the bus arrived. Wesley had a half day at school today, so he would return home before me or my wife were able to get home and watch him. This wasn't a big deal. He was 12 and could look after himself for a few hours. We told him to call my cell phone as soon as he got home after school that day to make sure he was home safely. As Wes climbed up the stairs onto the bus, my wife began to tremble and eventually break into tears. Neither of us knew what she was crying for, but we waved our son goodbye and both climbed into the car to finish off the work week. My cell phone rang at exactly 12:33 that afternoon. My iPhone played the default marimba tone, and I saw that I was receiving a call from our home landline. It must have been Wesley, who had just gotten off the bus and ran into our home, obeying my instructions to call. When I slid my finger across the screen and answered the phone, the only thing I heard was the empty dial tone of our home landline, as if he hadn't typed out my number yet. I called out his name a few times through my cell, but there was nothing. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. He did as he was instructed, called Dad as soon as he got home, and must have sprinted out the door to go play in the woods. I thought nothing of it until I got home. I picked up my wife from the store on the way back to the house. The porch lights were on, which was our family's way of indirectly saying, "Someone's home." Upon entering our house, I called out to Wesley to see if he was in his room. I got no response, so I assumed he was still outside in the woods, even 5 hours after his call. My kid always loved that fort that I built him. Kim began making dinner, and I changed my clothes and went to the spot in the woods where my son and I had constructed his home away from home. It was starting to get dark, so it was a bit difficult to see through the woods. I spotted the light from his treehouse lamp on through the window, and, as a dad should, began silently creeping up the short ladder nailed into the tree to scare the crap out of him. When I reached the top, I quickly swung the curtain door open and let out a roar in an attempt to scare my poor, unexpecting son. However, after scanning the small room, Wesley wasn't sitting in his beanbag chair as he normally was. In fact, the chair and his entire collections of rocks, bugs, comics, and games were completely gone off of the wooden shelves. The only things in the room were the lit citronella camping lamp that we had given to him when we built the treehouse, and a single Skechers sneaker lying in the middle of the room. The shoe was facing the doorway. I walked over to pick it up and examined it in the light of the treehouse lamp. Nothing was unusual about it, but it was Wesley's. I peeked out the window, wondering where my son could have run off to with only one shoe. The darkness had started to creep over the entire forest, and it would be very dark in no time. I called out into the twilight several times with no response. He was probably waiting in hiding to scare me, and it was working. I was terrified already. I left the lamp on and descended the ladder of the treehouse, continuing to scan the dim area for my son. I called and searched for 30 minutes in the dark, getting no response. I was beginning to panic. Sprinting back in the direction of our home, I noticed that the light in his room was on. A wave of calm and relaxation washed over me. He must have snuck home while I was out here searching for him, little bugger. I opened the back door and entered the kitchen, immediately greeted by my wife, asking about the shoe in my hand and where her little Wesley was. I explained what happened, and she told me he hadn't come home. Once again, beginning to panic, I sprinted down the hallway to his room and flung the door open. The light to the room was off, and the interior was completely bare. I know that I saw his light on when I was returning home from the woods. I flipped the light on with my right hand, still clutching his sneaker with my left. The room was completely empty. His bed, dresser, posters, rug, and bookshelf were completely gone. My wife heard my scream and came instantly rushing to my side. Then she screamed too. We didn't scream at anything we saw, but by the complete lack of something that was before us. Wesley and his possessions were nowhere to be seen, besides the shoe that I clutched. Examining it once more, in the bare light of his room, a single word had appeared on the sole of his shoe, but only when viewing it in his room. The word didn't appear anywhere else in the house, only his room. The word "don't" was clearly visible in black block letters on its bottom. Kim immediately called the police and reported a theft, kidnapping, missing child, breaking and entering, everything. I had already grabbed a flashlight and was combing the woods, looking for any signs of my missing child. The police arrived, and I told them everything that had happened. The police helped us search the woods and surrounding area for hours. We searched for days, then weeks, months. Wesley never returned to our house. Once a week, I would visit his hideout in the woods, which was now overgrown from the months spent untouched, and I left food and water in hopes that he was hiding somewhere in the woods. But the food just sat on the floor, rotting and filling with bugs. The time blended together, and we began to gradually lose hope of ever seeing our boy again. An entire year passed, and I continued to make weekly trips to the hideout, just in case he would someday return. August 23rd, Wesley's disappearance anniversary, landed on a Saturday in 2014. I reclined in silent mourning on my love seat, while I recalled the events of exactly 1 year ago. As I sat on the couch, my cell phone rang. The caller ID was our home landline, but I looked over to see our clunky phone set in its home on the dock. No one was using it. The time on the clock next to it read 12:33. I frantically answered the phone, hoping to hear something, anything. Dial tone. Just like 1 year ago. Today I had brought Wesley's favorite snack, Cheetos, and an Arnold Palmer sweet tea to bring to his hideout, but I forgot them on the counter as I sprinted out of the house. It didn't matter. I climbed the ladder of the fort and flung the curtain open. It had smelled bad because of the rotten bread that I had left last week, but I would take last week's meal back to the house whenever I left. Half expecting to see the bare room, as I had every single week following his disappearance, the long burnt-out citronella lamp flared on with my entrance, revealing the object sitting in front of me, Wesley's other shoe, once again facing the door. In stunned astonishment, I scooped up the shoe, examining it for another word. Once again, recalling 1 year ago, I sprinted as fast as I could back to the house. The light of his room was mysteriously on. I blazed past Kim in the kitchen and beelined straight to Wesley's room. I paused for a moment outside the door, noticing that no light was visible under it, the same as it was 1 year ago. I opened the door as Kim ran down the hall and followed me. She realized what I had discovered, and together we shared the same mixture of anguish and hope as I flipped on the light switch. The empty sole of the shoe now displayed another single word: bother. We looked at each other in silence as the tears streamed down our faces. I placed the shoe next to its partner in the center of the room, reading the phrase, "Don't bother." Each year since, my wife and I have found another piece of Wesley's clothing in the treehouse. The clues only appeared on August 23rd, after I received the phantom phone call from our home landline at exactly 12:33. When I received the call in 2015, I had requested the day off from work. I waited, with phone in hand, at the bottom of the ladder of the treehouse. As soon as my expected call rang, answered, and repeated the dial tone, I flung myself up the ladder into the treehouse. Same scene as before. Curtain open, light on, an object in the middle of the floor. This time, Wesley's pants lay on the floor, feet facing the door. Grabbing them and sprinting to his room felt all too familiar. I flipped the light on once again and read the next word on them, printed this time on the butt of the jeans. This year, the word was looking. August 23rd, 2016. It became tradition for me on these days to miss all other obligations. I wanted to figure out this mystery of my son. The time was 12:32, and I sat cross-legged in the empty hideout, waiting as the seconds ticked by until the inevitable phone call. To my surprise, my phone clock ticked to 12:33, and no call arrived. I waited for another minute, then 5, then 10 minutes. Giving up, I descended the ladder. Once my feet touched the ground, my phone instantly rang. Home landline. Repeat last year. The curtain, lamp, and object. This year was Wesley's shirt. The same striped, long-sleeve t-shirt I had last seen him in. In his bedroom, I read the next word, printed across the back. 4. I already dreaded what next year would bring. I knew that the next word was going to be him. Some sadistic asshole had kidnapped my son and stole all of his possessions, and now they were toying with me, throwing in my face the fact that I completely failed as a father. August 23rd, 2017. I waited outside the hideout for the call once again. I stood on the tiny deck in front of the curtain until I received the call, but it never came. It seemed that nothing would happen until I was completely on the ground, away from the treehouse. I climbed down the ladder, received the call, and returned to the fort. Wesley's underwear. This was a bit messed up, if you ask me. However, each article of clothing I had retrieved from the fort was completely clean, as if it was washed that day. The underwear was no exception. Returning to his room, my hunch upon the next word was completely proved wrong. Me. Placing the underwear next to the rest of the clothing, I read the words in order. Don't bother looking for me. Now, it's 2018, and my son's disappearance anniversary, if you can call it that, was 3 days ago. Nothing showed up in the treehouse. No phone calls. No clothing. I checked. Nothing new was added to this puzzle of his disappearance. I checked his room last night to see the 5 pieces of clothing in the room, as I did quite often, but nothing was there. On the 6th anniversary of his disappearance, all the articles disappeared. No one could have taken them. I had boarded up the window to Wesley's room and locked the door 3 times over. Those clothes were the last mementos that me and Kim had of our little boy. And now they were gone too. Thank you for watching and listening. Stay tuned for the next episode. Until then, stay well and stay safe. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.